Welcome to Entrepreneurial Reality with Bash. Every week we'll be speaking to startup and scale-up founders to learn about them, their ambitions for the business, goals and objectives. Every conversation is a moment in time, documenting entrepreneurs' current situation with a view to coming back next year to see how they are getting on. Each journey will be different. Each innovation could be game-changing. I hope you enjoy. Episode 2 of Series 1, and I'm honoured to have Kevin Brown with me of GigRev. Kevin, please introduce yourself and give some background as to where you've come from and why you're here today.
Hi, GigRev is my latest project. We've been working on this for about 2.5 years, mostly in the development stage, and launched last September with the first clients. Before that, I was involved in artist management for 5 or 6 years. Before that, an internet company which I sold to a company called Axel Springer in Germany. And before that, involved with fan clubs and artists.
Great. And you're also an investor in businesses as well.
I am, yeah. I mean, I've tried to pick a few good companies with my sort of online advertising background. Not all been successful, but the ones that have worked have been pretty good.
So one example would be Super Awesome.
It's probably the biggest example of a company that I invested in right at the beginning, and now I think it's a valuation of about 100 million, I think.
Superb. It's been voted the fastest tech company growing in the UK by Financial Times, I believe.
Good CEO. Dylan Collins, I think he's a fantastic guy, really knew his stuff. And actually, I think, you can try and get these things right, but I think it was my biggest investment, which is that seemed to be the best one. I think out of about 15 or 20 investments, I think I've had 5 go bust. Mm-hmm. The rest are floating around a little bit. I think I've got 3 that are relatively good, but Super Awesome is well above everything else. Really good.
Fantastic.
Good team of people.
So let's talk about GigRev. Just for complete openness, I've personally made an investment in GigRev.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome. So could you tell the listeners a bit more about the premise, the challenges you face in the industry, and what sort of problems you're looking to solve with GigRev?
Yeah, I mean, this all came about, I guess, while I was managing artists and thinking, well, we're trying to run a business here with data that we don't own. I can't think of any other industry that works on data that they don't own. So we had a fan base of people on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, but no direct connection with those people at all. So I couldn't mail these people to tell them about a new tour, a new t-shirt, a new album without paying Facebook each time. So this felt completely wrong to me. And it began just by thinking, well, we need to just collect email addresses. That's the most important thing. But the problem with an email address is you can use that, but you can't use it every day. You can use it for important information. But how do you get a communication going between the fan and the artist in an ongoing sort of way? You can't. Email, I always think of like a letter through your letterbox. It's a one-way thing. You read it, you're not likely to reply. You're probably going to purchase from that email, hopefully, but it's not a two-way conversation. So we still needed that way to talk to fans and for fans to communicate, feel part of a community. Mm-hmm. And that was the premise of the beginnings of it.
Great, thank you. And so GigRev has been created to engage the fans closer to the artists, the creators of content, essentially, and entertainment. There seems to be a trend occurring in the industry where there is a proliferation of social media applications that takes up a lot of time and effort to get attention. These artists are, I understand, very, very capable at creating music to inspire, drive emotion in people, and as a result get a significant following. So could you tell a bit more to the trends in the music industry, the value that GigRev would potentially deliver the fans ultimately, but then of course the musicians, from the very small who are budding musicians that want fame and fortune, to the ones that are already there, of course.
Yeah, I think you have to go all the way back to the record labels and then think what happened when Napster appeared, really. I think there was a sort of defining line for everybody there, which the record industry was making a lot of money. Obviously, you've got EMI, Warner, Sony, Universal as the key 4 labels that were making all of the revenue, really from either publishing or from physical sales. Then suddenly being faced with digital ways to distribute through Napster, and I think they handled it pretty badly, to be honest. I think what they did is they initially tried to stop Napster, and that was never going to be successful. They priced it at $9.99 for everything. I think it was very ill thought through, to be honest. I think they just came up with a price that felt right and decided $9.99 for everything was going to be great. Now, the big problem with that method of charging for what in essence is really a radio station, but a random access radio station, is that it kills the supply chain, the route to market. If you think about what radio was there for, and what it still is there for, radio helps sell a ticket, a physical product. It sells you into that artist. You listen to the radio, you wait for the song to play, and at that stage you think that's a great song, but you have to wait until you listen to that again. And in the meantime, waiting, you don't want to wait, so you go and buy the physical item. What Spotify has now done, or any streaming service, has made that song, you don't have to wait for that song anymore. So all of a sudden, radio, random access, becomes the end product. So it's killed the fact that you don't now need to buy the physical product, because you can listen to it at the same price that a record company would get for one radio play, but divided by all those numbers divided by 1. So basically, if you get 1 play on radio, 1 would bring an artist £65.
Right. So
the premise of the streaming services and the logic behind that is, if 1 person is listening, divide £65 by the number of Radio 1 listeners, maybe 5 million, and that's the cost per play, which doesn't quite work when you've got random access. So it's priced wrong and works for some, but not at all for others. And I think that's the big problem. There's always been a big difference between, I mean, you can be a very, very big artist worldwide, or you just don't make it at all. But I think the big difference here is that the majority of plays on Spotify are going to a very tiny amount of songs. Most of those actually back catalogue songs owned by the 4 labels, now 3 labels, who, if you think about it, just had hard drives full of music, and they dusted off and stuck onto Spotify. So the question is really, I think, for the future, does Spotify become an archive of old material because there's no cost associated with that? And then what happens to new material? Because as an artist, 1 million plays will generate somewhere between $2,000 and $15,000. 1 million plays. So even if you're lucky enough to get 1 million plays of your song on Spotify, it's probably paying for a fifth of the album to be recorded. So it doesn't actually work for a new artist unless they're in that top 1% of artists.
And then you're forced to sell the rights to some of the music that you've created, which could be taken on by another artist and make huge amounts of money elsewhere. You don't see the true value necessarily.
Well, I think that's another problem for the old industry. The fact that as soon as you get to a status of having hundreds of millions of plays, like an Ed Sheeran, for example, or this guy called Chance the Rapper, who was recently offered $10 million to sign to, I believe, Universal, and turned that down. And the manager said, well, why at this stage, now we're getting all of these plays while we're selling out gigs, while we're selling out merchandise, why would I now give away 80% of my revenue to a label? You know, they didn't want me when we were nothing. Right. Why would I now give nearly all of my money away? And of course, they didn't sign the deal. And I think that's interesting because labels don't now invest in new early bands, but they also are not in a position to invest in established bands because there's no reason to give away that proportion of your revenue. So the old industry is effectively dead and survives off of 40 years of back catalogue.
So how does GigRev overcome these challenges then, and additional content that may not be available? I know I personally would love to see somebody who's going through the process of creation in addition to the publication of that song.
Yeah, I think there's no engagement. You play the song. I think when you listen to Spotify, you listen to the song, you might not know who the artist is. I don't think there's that connection with the artist. It doesn't mean that people don't want that connection, but the average Spotify listener is the person that listens to radio. It doesn't mean they bought albums. I think around 76% of all recorded income comes from 16% of fans. And I think that shows that there's a big difference between radio listeners and music lovers. And I think that's got lost in translation with streaming networks. So those 16% are the really important ones, the ones that actually buy into the scene. They go to gigs, they do this. And I think it's also forgotten that there's plenty of artists that can be financially successful but never chart and never be seen as relevant to Spotify. If you look at the rock genre, for example, they can tour every year. They can make a lot of money from merchandise, and a lot of vinyl, CDs, and tickets, but they'll never get into the hundreds of millions of streams on Spotify. So how are they seen as relevant to the industry when we're now measuring popularity in hundreds of millions of streams? So I think there's a really big problem there that doesn't show that actually the revenue drivers don't always have to be Spotify, and there's a lot of money in that sector just below the Spotify chart.
Right.
There's a UK artist at the moment that sold 60,000 tickets this week for his first album tour, but because his plays on Spotify aren't worldwide, is a UK artist doing very well in the UK, but because the figures are global, and he's not a global artist yet, he doesn't even register as relevant, so Radio 1 won't play him.
It's a real shame.
Which doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I think it just shows probably that certainly the UK charts and probably the BBC need to, and they are indeed thinking how they can represent UK music more than what they are presently, because there is a big problem with that. There's certain sectors on Spotify, and when I say Spotify, we're talking about all streaming networks.
Right.
That work well, hip-hop being the top sector. It's a worldwide audience. It crosses lots of boundaries, and it's pop music. You can listen to it without caring who you're listening to. And I think what we're trying to do is say, well, you don't need hundreds of millions of plays. What you need is a loyal audience, and that loyal audience will pay for access to you, whether that's the t-shirt that you're printing, whether it's your album, your signed album, whether it's a VIP meet and greet. All of these things are really important, and you don't need millions of people to listen to you on Spotify in order to get a few thousand people to a concert. And they're the people that should be your loyal followers, and harnessing that power is difficult when social networks own that data. So bring that data back into somewhere you control, and effectively you're selling to them, but they're certainly not buying from you, they're supporting you. And I think it's a really important word in the way this works.
Yeah.
I often say that if there was a button on Netflix that said, actually, I don't want to pay you $9.99 a month, but I would like the content for free, we'd probably press that button, because we don't have any allegiance with that company. We don't have feel any feeling towards that company. But if you give that same option to a fan that loves his favourite band, then they're very unlikely to say, well, I don't want to pay. They actually want to support that artist, and there's plenty of platforms out there that prove that model works. People want to support an artist because they want to support their art.
That's interesting, because in the gaming industry as well, I understand that they release a product that then has additional content that comes out over time. and you invest in that game, that production, that content, with a view to getting more information over time, and then you get incremental payments as well. So it's slightly different in terms of the mechanics and the financials, but there's quite a lot of similarity in terms of supporting and promoting. And
maybe that's more addiction, though. I'm not sure. I know my kids play. One of them plays World of Warcraft, which I think the other day I discovered about 20 transactions of various packs of diamonds that he bought. I think it's more addiction than support, but it's. I think the subscription model is a model that works.
Yes.
Whether that's Netflix, whether it's in a game, whether it's within an artist fan club, which is essentially what we're building, an artist fan club or an artist community. Yeah. That subscription model really does work well for.
Brilliant. Okay, so what next for GigRev? Who are the artists, first of all, that you have signed on that you can talk about that are releasing an app based on your platform? Just share who they are at the moment.
Yeah, there's a lot in the works that I can't talk about. Obviously, it's a very difficult subject to speak about artists before their app goes live. You can imagine the absolute chaos that could happen when that happens. But we are working. Who can I say? We've got UB40, which is a very large act in terms of where we are at the moment. We've got Matt Goss and Bros, and then quite a number of smaller acts with sort of 25 to 50,000 people on Facebook, which will have very tight fan bases, can play venues of 500 to 1,000 people, and I guess particularly in that area, very, very loyal fans. So fewer fans, but they will go to a lot of gigs and they will buy the merchandise. You don't buy a t-shirt at a gig at 25 quid because it's value for money. You buy it because you want to show that you're a fan and support the band.
Yeah, brilliant. I agree totally, and that interests me a lot around the enablement of artists at an earlier stage in their evolution, their production of great music, to become independent and be self-sufficient in terms of income.
Well, the first artist that went live on that platform was a country band from Glasgow that called me, and they said, well, we do concerts in Germany. And I thought, okay, so how does a country band in Germany work? Anyway, very smart, actually. They played near all the US military bases there. So I thought, okay, very good move. And I think it was quite an interesting moment because at that point in time, our model was based on a subscription of about $1.99 a month. Mm-hmm. We thought that was what a fan would be willing to pay to join a fan club. And they said to us, no, we want to charge $4.99 a month. And I thought, well, this can't possibly work. So it didn't feel the right price at all. We launched the app and they put a mail out to their current fan base. They posted on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, come and join the fan club. And within the first 24 hours, I think we had 150 people signed up. And that eventually, and it's still growing now, but there was extremely quick take rate. They've got the audience already. So we're not going out there promoting GigRev because we're just a tech behind the artist that's always going to be bigger than us. So they promote their app under their name to their fans. And I think the current number of paid fans on there is at least 400 people. Again, very rapidly. And I think what it did for the band is it meant that they could then not think about touring as their key income and merchandise and what happens when they're not on tour. They suddenly had a regular income, which allowed them to think, okay, so now this income can be used for marketing the band, so they could finally employ a PR person and somebody to help in their kitchen 3 days a week to post out the merchandise, and that provided more time for them to record more material. So they've now got the infrastructure to allow them the time to develop their art, which I think is a big problem. It's really difficult now, I think, as an artist to bring enough money in to survive without a second job. But of course, that kills the creativity.
Absolutely.
So it's totally changed their life.
It's going to be very impactful across many artists' lives.
I think that's it. I think the key, an artist needs to be seen. They're happily recording video and photos and happy to put all this on Facebook and Instagram. That's what they do. That's what they do already. I think the idea of thinking, well, we could monetize that stuff that we're doing already in a platform with people that will support us is actually a very small step. And they're certainly full of content. They've got plenty of things going on to record and that fans are interested in listening to. We've got an artist called Raven Eye, which recently toured with both Slash from Guns N' Roses and Bush. And they have, similar to this, we have a podcast which they produce every few weeks, and that's available in the app. But I think the important thing with all of this is it's more about windowing content within the app. So what we don't want, and the artist doesn't want, is to just have it available to a small group of people, because they, as well as the industry, needs them to get this as wide as possible. So they'll produce content, video, podcasts, all sorts of things for fans, but release it later on YouTube, on Spotify, wherever it might be. And I think that's really important. Give it to the fan first, because that they are in a circle of friends.
Yeah, they're there.
Really supportive.
They are there for you. So it's great. You've mentioned a number of artists. There's more coming to the platform, to your app, to access their fans. What would the next 12 months look like for you? So when we have this conversation again in 12 months, where do you think you'll be?
Always a good question, isn't it? Where I hope we'll be, and where we appear to be heading is, I think we've hit the market at a really interesting time. There's a lot of people unhappy with Spotify. I think the whole streaming industry has been questioned. I did a talk for City the other week, City Group. And actually, I think what was interesting about it is that they asked me to come in and talk about direct to fan. I've never spoken to a company like that. We've always been outside of the sort of industry, I think. Never quite understand why, because direct to fan is just direct to consumer, and direct to consumer is the obvious way for any industry to go. But their question seems to be the overall streaming industry is struggling to make money. In fact, I don't think there is a single streaming network that's making money anywhere in the world apart from one in Asia. Spotify currently, I think, is losing, possibly the last quarter was 220 million. So if they're at a run rate of sort of $1 billion a year, and they've just floated, and the key shareholders, the labels, have now sold their shares, there's something not quite right. I'm not really getting why and how, or why people got out of that deal, unless there's something not right under the hood. I don't really see how they're going to turn it into a profit. I really don't. As a archive, for new material, it's such a big question. I think we've lost something I think we've lost a route to market, and nobody's quite figured it out yet.
So again, it's the day-old challenge around the middleman and removing that middleman and having more of a direct relationship.
I think that happens already with the new music industry, which I think kind of begins with the company Cobalt, who turned the label on its head and said, okay, instead of the label taking 80% and give the artist 20%, Cobalt flipped that over and said, well, you get the 80% and we'll take the 20%. Now, Cobalt have, I believe, over 2,000 staff at the moment. Any artist that's already been developed by a label tends to sign up with Cobalt. So, for example, the Foo Fighters are on Cobalt. Snow Patrol, they've got 6,000 artists in total that have now left the label system, and new albums are now released by Cobalt. So there's a lot of other companies similar to that on the same model. So taking back control of your music and earning as much as possible out of it is really obvious to me. I don't really understand how that's not obvious at all. So I think fewer fans and taking the majority of the revenue is the way that we're going. And I think in a world of fewer and fewer sort of Wembley Stadium acts, if you think back to the 80s and 90s, quite a few people playing in stadiums. Yeah. Now, okay, you've got Ed Sheeran, who's doing extremely well for himself, and another handful of acts, but there's less and less of those sort of mega bands, mega groups out there, and a lot more arena and smaller venue acts out there. So I think the age of your Pink Floyds and Elton Johns and those kind of guys is difficult. It's difficult to maintain that sort of massive stadium thing. You've got YouTube; they can still do it. I was at a gig at the Garage in London a few weeks ago with an artist called Orla Gartland, who was a YouTuber. She started on YouTube when she was about 14. She was covering songs, and then she'd thrown the odd original song into that. And she's probably got 18, 19 now. So I go to this gig, and so the Garage holds 200 people-ish. Very unusual audience. It literally looked like a room full of people that watch YouTube all day. But what was really interesting about it was the fact that after the show, she went to the back of the room, and almost every person in that audience had a photo and bought a piece of merchandise. So the loyalty of that and the amount of money made from that tour from merchandise would have been ridiculously high. You're talking about every one of those people paying at least 30 or 40 pounds for a pair of socks and a t-shirt and a hat and a various, so really, really organised, and I think it just shows that you can earn a lot of money from your music, but you have to think in terms of you've got to be really organised and think, okay, well, it may be that the music is the reason people come to see me, but the music won't necessarily. That's not where the money is.
No,
it's in the services that you can offer around that, whether it's VIP meet and greets, whether it's a fan club, whether it's merchandise, because people are dedicated, and all those people in that room knew every single word to every song she sang that night. I think that shows the loyalty of people.
That's really cool. And then talking about fan club, the engagement, I understand that you're working on a few ideas around production of physical content that, if you could say a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think, fan club, let's face it, fan club isn't a very cool phrase. Turn it into a fan community, and it seems to be a little bit more cool. And I think what we're finding now is that people really want something real. That everything's digital in this world now, and you download it. You don't download the track. You listen to a track on Spotify. You watch a video on YouTube. And how do you get that extra connection with the artist? We know that people are willing to pay more than $9.99 per month for their favourite artist. We know that already. We've seen that in so many different ways, where people will buy a ticket and a t-shirt as a package. So as part of a fan club or fan community package that we build, why not include a year's membership with a exclusive piece of merchandise, a signed photograph, an album when it's released later on, and maybe even a fanzine. And all of these things have got great value, but are very cheap to produce. A t-shirt maybe costs £2.50, but can sell at £20.
Yes.
A fanzine sounds old-fashioned, but actually it's a book of memories, a physical book, something that you can't get anywhere else. And again, costs £2, but what's the value in the eye of the beholder? It's maybe £15.
And maybe it's signed, it becomes memorabilia, and then over time there's value it sort of appreciates, maybe.
And then I think people really, really want this kind of stuff. This is the reason that I buy vinyl. But I think, I forgot the numbers now, but I was recently at a BPI meeting and the music industry, and the number of vinyls is still increasing. The sales of vinyl is still increasing, but the number of vinyl players is not really going anywhere.
No.
So people are buying it because, again, they want something real.
Yes.
And I think, and that's about supporting the artist.
You funny you should say that. I recently asked an artist directly on Twitter, can I have a signed vinyl copy, please? I haven't had any response just yet because they probably haven't considered it. But it's, I'm one of those guys who quite happy to buy vinyl.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
We've got nothing to go on our shelves anymore. No books, no CDs, no DVDs, no nothing. So I think we need these things to show who we are. And my oldest kid, who's 16, 17, going to college this year, and to show his identity, he's got posters on the wall, he's got his albums there, and I think that's people need to show it. You can't have everything on your phone and computer. And listening to an album for a fan of music is really important. Not just listening to that one song that's the pop song that's there today and gone tomorrow. There's a song by a guy called Big Shaq recently that my kids played over and over and over again. It was a song called Man's Not Hot, and it turned out to be a joke song in the end. A hell of a lot of plays on streaming. Look at the video for Man's Not Hot, and it's quite funny for a little bit. I think after 200 plays, I got a little bit bored of the background music of that playing, but it's gone. Then it's gone. It's the next thing, and I think you've got that throwaway music that can happen. But you've also, and still today, it's really not seen because of Spotify, but there's a lot of venues in London, and they're full every night with 200 people all watching their favourite act.
Yeah.
They'll never register as being important. I can guarantee that a lot of those are earning a lot more money because they're very hard-working musicians than somebody getting 1 million plays on Spotify.
That's a good point. And the atmosphere in those bars and venues are fantastic.
There's amazing acts breaking through at the moment, but again, they'll never meet the criteria to get anywhere on streaming.
So in going back to your my question, first of all, of where GigRev you see in 12 months' time?
Well, we look at what we generally look for is a couple of things, really. We're looking for artists that have at least 25,000 people following them on social media. That gives us an idea that there's actual interest there. And also, overall, what we don't want, and I'm quite happy to tell an artist that I don't think this will work for you. We don't want people that, or this won't work for people that just want to play music and are not interested in interacting with their fan base, which does account for a percentage of artists. But then you've got the very savvy artists like the YouTuber I mentioned earlier that interact with the fans online through Facebook, through Twitter, through Instagram, and they understand that their job as a musician is not just to go up on stage and play music. They understand that their job is to be a full-time celebrity. I don't really know.
It's social, isn't it?
You're
leveraging access of different angles, different routes to your fans.
Where is it going? I mean, this doesn't work for Radiohead. It does work for Ricky Martin. That's the kind of thing, because they're different. They've got a different way of marketing the business. So I think Radiohead very much keeps themselves, and they come and do their concerts, but they're at that stage they could do that.
Right.
The other sort of end would be sort of like I'm mentioning Ricky Martin because he's very social. Lots of live broadcasts on Facebook. He's immersed in his fan base. Got very loyal fans, and that works very well for somebody like him. Same as Robbie Williams or bands like this. They understand that they need to be a lot more than just the musician on the stage. And I think if we're to grow, then we can grow artists. I wish I got the answer to growing from no fans to the first 25,000. You know, that's the holy grail. How do you break an artist now?
Yeah.
When there's no infrastructure or money, there's no upfront money from anywhere whatsoever to put the first chunk of cash in to make that work. But once we're at 25,000, that's about the kind of figure that we need to make it work. Not only for us financially, but for the artist, because if the artist isn't getting enough engagement with that, then they'll soon not use the app, which is, I don't want that to happen either. So with 25,000 fans and a fairly social band, then we're tending to find 15 to 20% of Facebook users will download the app for free, register, giving the artist direct access to that data of who that fan is. And then we begin the job of converting these into subscribers. And really, again, it's the job of the artist to produce content, and they then choose the content that they want to make premium, and that premium content forms part of the package that the fan will pay for.
Right.
And if everything goes to plan and the content is flowing well, then that works for us and means that we can sign up. It certainly proved the model to us. It's enough figures to prove it to the artist, and I think from here on we're now stepping this up to larger artists. So the largest artist we work with at the moment has got 1 million people on Facebook, so that'll be 150,000 people minimum that will be using the app. And then from there we keep going one step up. So I think you can't go right to the top and get Robbie Williams on day one, for example, or Ed Sheeran. But like any industry, when you're inside of it, it's a pretty small industry. Everybody knows each other.
Right.
So we're certainly making a lot of steps to do that. So I think quantity as well as, well, all quality, but quantity as in sort of smaller artists we're growing because the fan base tends to be much more loyal percentage-wise for a smaller artist.
Yes.
As you grow, they're perceived to be richer, like Ed Sheeran. You know, you don't need to donate.
I went traveling last year in Philippines and I heard Ed Sheeran. That's all I heard.
It's everywhere. I mean, he's making an absolute fortune. To be honest, I don't know if we can make much of a difference to his income. We can certainly help with the data capture. But I think the sweet spot is the artist that plays Hammersmith Apollo, Brixton Academy, and those sort of arena level.
Yeah.
You know, a good example I think would be the Killers. That kind of
love the Killers. Love the Killers.
And I think those are the kind of guys that have the content that need to they're established a brand, and their job now is to maintain that brand.
Yeah.
And I think I particularly like the way the Killers do it. You know, they have one phenomenal album, and I think the second one was pretty good. I think the third one started to get a bit shaky, and I think from what they've learned now is that actually probably don't produce too many more albums and live off the initial ones, build the show up, maintain the audience, and I think that's probably their business plan, I would say now, which is a good plan, to be honest. And if you're in the music industry, don't break anything by producing an awful album. And I think a lot of bands can do that.
Good. Thank you. We are progressing quite a lot in terms of the time. So thank you so much, Kevin. Every interview I have, I ask 5 questions at the end, just very quickly.
Sure.
And so if you could tell me, so is there a particular book you're reading at the moment? If so, what it is? Or is there a book you'd recommend the listeners to read?
You know what? I wish I'd got time to read a book, but when I'm not actually working, I'm daydreaming about the next feature of the software or what we need to do in order to progress. So, you know, I
suppose from a music theme, then, is there a particular instrument you're playing? Or?
You know what? Working in the music industry and listening to music all day, actually the last thing you want to do when you switch off at the end of the day is actually music, which is quite sad, actually. So I do like music, and the last tour, the last big gig was U2 Joshua Tree tour, which was last year, which actually was 30 years ago. It was my first ever gig, so it was nice to see that.
Cool.
Other than that, I ended up going to a lot of small gigs and getting deafened.
And in terms of entrepreneur, business owner, is there any individual that you are following or admire the most? And again, it could be a musician, for instance.
I don't know if I can actually name anybody particularly, but I really like people that just think completely outside of the box and aren't restricted by what's been done before, because I think even the things that have been done before, they might have been done at the wrong time. And I think it's easy to get into a pattern of thinking that if something's not worked before, it's not going to work again in the future. A lot of people, I like to listen to people, and I think the important thing is going to a meeting and really taking on board everybody's opinion and be the sponge for that information, and hopefully then sort of figure out what all of that means and turn that into something that can help us as a company.
Great, thank you.
You know what I really like doing? I've spoken at quite a few different colleges and universities, and I find it really enjoyable to tell and talk to people about that there are different ways to do things. I recently spoke at ACM College in Guildford. My son's going there in September, so I don't think I'll be wanted around there for much longer. And I was asked to speak about alternatives to record labels, and I think it was really interesting to be in a room of people that have grown up with YouTube, with Spotify, with Facebook, and actually never knew any different. And I think I was halfway through my first lecture there and realised that I'd really got this wrong. I realised I was speaking to a room of people that I couldn't relate to with the presentation that I was doing, and started again, literally just said, okay, we're going to scrap this conversation now and just begin again. So I really find it enjoyable teaching, actually.
Oh, cool.
I think, my experience with that would be with my ex-internet company that I grew to over 200 staff. It got to the point that actually there was no entrepreneurial spirit there at all, because the machine's working, don't break anything that's not working, and you have a team of people there that are their sole purpose and job is to maintain what's already working there. And there was just a time that became really apparent to me that there was nothing more I could do. I couldn't be the entrepreneur in that company anymore. It didn't, in fact, need an entrepreneur. So I think I've always found the right moment to move on to the next thing. Interesting.
Thank you. I really do appreciate your time, Kevin. I'm honoured that you spent the time with me today. Thank you. And yes, I wish you every success. And hopefully you can come back in the next 12 months and share with you your experiences, the news, and where you go from there.
I hope to be back.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you.
Take care. So what do you think? We'll have another interesting story to dive into next week. Looking forward to it already. Some questions to you in the meantime. What is your story? What is your reality right now? And what are you working towards? Let me know. So you can connect with me on Twitter. Just type in Bash in the search and you'll find me. So Bash, B-A-S-H. Easy. On Instagram, it's Bash Reality. So that's Bash_reality. And on LinkedIn, Benjamin Ashmore. Make sure you subscribe, and until next week, cheers.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.